A mind in chains, a gate to freedom. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet discomfort, even when things are going fine. A low hum of restlessness that follows you from one moment to the next. You meditate, you read, you do your best to be present, but there's still something unsettled beneath the surface, a subtle tension, a longing for peace that never quite arrives. You're not alone. More and more people today are turning to Buddhist wisdom, not as a religion, but as a mirror that gently reflects the real cause of our suffering, not the world itself, but our mind's refusal to accept it as it is. For centuries, monks and lay people alike have explored this truth, that the mind, when left unchecked, becomes a prison. But that same mind, when understood with clarity and compassion, becomes a path to liberation. This video is not about escaping life. It's about waking up to it with fresh eyes and an open heart. Together, we'll explore why we suffer even when nothing is wrong, why control exhausts us, and how letting go, gently, bravely, can return us to the simplicity we've forgotten. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you already are beneath the noise. So breathe. Be here. We're not adding more. We're coming home. The real cause of suffering isn't out there. We grow up believing that suffering is caused by the things that happen to us: traffic, heartbreak, a difficult boss, a shrinking bank account. And for a while, that belief makes sense. It's easy to point to the outside world and say, "This is why I feel the way I do." But the longer we live, the more we begin to sense something deeper. We notice that the same event doesn't affect everyone the same way. What crushes one person leaves another calm. One person loses a job and spirals into despair. Another loses the same job and finds freedom. So what's the difference? It's not the event itself. It's how we relate to it. And this is where Buddhist wisdom becomes so powerful. The Buddha taught that suffering arises not from the things we experience, but from the mind's reaction to those things. Not the loss, but the attachment. Not the moment, but our resistance to it. This is a hard truth to accept because it shifts the responsibility inward. It asks us to stop blaming and start observing. To look not at what's happening, but how we're clinging, fighting, judging. And that's uncomfortable, especially in a world that teaches us to fix, fight, or flee. But within that discomfort is the beginning of liberation. Because if suffering is caused by our mind's reactions, then freedom doesn't require a perfect life. It doesn't require the world to change. It requires us to understand the patterns of our own mind. When we slow down and look closely, we start to notice those patterns. The stories we tell ourselves, the expectations we grip, the fears that play on repeat. We start to see how much of our pain comes not from what is, but from what we think should be. And that realization is both humbling and empowering, because it means peace is possible right here, without changing anything outside. It means we can stop chasing and start seeing. Start breathing. Start softening, even in the middle of chaos. The Buddha didn't promise a life free of difficulty. He promised a path through it. And that path begins the moment we stop saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is my mind doing with this?" It's not easy work, but it's honest. And in that honesty, a door opens, not outward, but inward, to a place where peace was never lost, just forgotten. The invisible weight. Why we suffer more than we need to. There's a story some therapists tell. They hold up a glass of water and ask, "How heavy is this?" People guess. 8 ounces, a pound maybe. But then the therapist says, "It's not about the weight. It's about how long you hold it. A few minutes, no problem. An hour, it starts to ache. A whole day, your arm goes numb." That's what we do with our worries, our memories, our unspoken fears. We carry them, not for minutes or hours, but sometimes for years. And most of the time, we don't even realize it. We normalize the tension in our shoulders. We ignore the tightness in our chest. We accept the restless nights, the snapping at small things, the dull ache beneath the surface. We say, "I'm just tired," but it's not just tiredness. It's the invisible weight of everything we haven't let go of. Buddhism has a name for this, dukkha. It's often translated as suffering, but it's more like a quiet discontent, a low, constant hum that tells you something's not quite right, that life should be different, that you should be different. And the root of that suffering? Attachment, not just to things, but to expectations, to ideas about how life is supposed to go, to how others should treat us, to who we think we have to be. We hold on to stories like, "I should be further along by now. They shouldn't have hurt me. This wasn't supposed to happen." And those stories, though silent, are heavy, heavier than we know. The truth is, it's not what happens to us that drains us. It's the mental weight of trying to control it, fix it, rewrite it, or make it fit a version of reality that never existed. We fight what is. We resist change. We cling to control. But life isn't interested in our scripts. It doesn't wait for us to feel ready. It shifts, it breaks. It surprises us. And the more we resist, the more we suffer. This is the invisible weight. It doesn't scream. It doesn't leave a mark. But it's there, in your sighs, your tension, your sleepless nights. It's the reason even quiet moments don't feel peaceful. And yet, there's something quietly revolutionary in this truth. If it's your grip that's causing the ache, then loosening that grip, even just a little, is where healing begins. You don't have to let go of everything. You don't have to be perfectly zen. You just have to start noticing. Noticing when you're tightening. And choosing, just once, to soften. Maybe it starts with one breath. Maybe that's enough for today. You Can't Sweep the Leaves Forever. A story about letting go. There's a story from a small village in Asia where a young monk woke early each morning to sweep the temple courtyard. It was his daily ritual, a way to clear the path, to prepare the space, to bring order to the day. One morning, after a heavy storm, the ground was covered in leaves and branches. He swept with urgency, determined to restore the peaceful space. But no matter how much he cleared, more leaves kept falling. The wind continued to stir. His frustration grew. He muttered to himself, "I just cleaned this." An old master passed by and watched silently. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "You can keep sweeping forever, or you can learn to sit and watch the leaves fall." That one sentence holds an entire teaching. A truth not just about leaves or courtyards, but about the way we try to manage our lives. Most of us are sweeping constantly, not with brooms, but with our minds. We try to clean up everything: emotions, conversations, misunderstandings, the behavior of others. We try to keep our inbox empty, our schedule perfect, our image controlled. But life, like the wind, doesn't stop for our efforts. Leaves fall again. People disappoint us again. The plan falls apart again. And we suffer, not because things are messy, but because we believe they shouldn't be. In the West, this often shows up as the drive to fix everything. We're taught that with enough effort, we can control outcomes. That if something's wrong, we must immediately make it right. But Buddhism offers a different approach. What if peace doesn't come from getting everything under control, but from letting go of our need to control? Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean apathy. It means seeing clearly what we can and cannot change. It means learning to be present with reality, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. Think about the energy we spend trying to make life behave. Trying to force people to understand us, to love us, to see us a certain way. Trying to stop change from happening. That effort is exhausting. And most of the time, it doesn't work. Because life isn't a problem to be solved. It's a process to be lived. The monk didn't need a cleaner courtyard. He needed a calmer mind. And so do we. So the next time you feel that pull, the need to fix everything, to control every outcome, pause. Ask yourself, am I just sweeping the leaves again? And maybe, just maybe, take a seat. Watch the leaves fall. Let the wind do what it does. And in that space, you might just find what the monk found. Not perfection, but peace. Mindfulness is not emptiness. It's full attention. Many people hear the word mindfulness and imagine something blank, an empty mind, a still lake with no ripples. They picture a monk sitting in silence, untouched by thought or emotion, and assume that's what mindfulness is, the absence of mental activity. But that's not what mindfulness means, not in Buddhist practice and not in real life. Mindfulness is not emptiness. It's attention, it's presence. It's the ability to notice what's happening in this moment without being dragged away by it. You don't have to shut off your thoughts. You don't have to feel peaceful all the time. You just have to show up for what's here as it is. Picture yourself standing beside a river. Thoughts come down like leaves floating on the surface. You don't have to jump in. You don't have to chase them. You just watch them pass. Sometimes, without realizing it, you'll end up in the water, caught in a story, an emotion, a memory. But the moment you notice, you step back to the shore. That stepping back, that returning, is mindfulness. And the beauty is, it doesn't require silence. It doesn't require a retreat center or incense or perfect circumstances. You can practice mindfulness while brushing your teeth, while driving, while having a conversation. It's not where you are, it's how you are. To be mindful is to be awake to your own life. Not in some grand, dramatic way, but in the small, ordinary details. The warmth of a mug in your hands, the sound of the wind through the trees, the feeling of your feet touching the floor as you walk. Mindfulness says, don't miss this moment, this breath, this conversation. It doesn't promise comfort. It promises clarity. And with that clarity comes something else, compassion. Because when you're truly present with yourself, you begin to see your own mind with less judgment. You notice the anxiety without becoming it. You feel the anger without exploding from it. You soften toward your experience instead of fighting it. That's not emptiness. That's fullness. A fullness of attention. A fullness of being. And it's available to you, not someday, but now. The 3-breath anchor. How to return to the present. It's easy to get lost in the noise of life. The to-do lists, the notifications, the headlines. Even when we're sitting still, the mind is moving, replaying what we said yesterday, anticipating what might happen tomorrow, jumping from one worry to the next. And in that constant motion, we lose the one thing that's always been ours, this moment. The present is the only place life truly happens, not in the past we can't change, not in the future we can't predict, but right here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this step. And yet, most of us spend our lives anywhere but here. We eat while scrolling. We walk while planning. We talk while thinking of what to say next. We're there, but not really there. That's where mindfulness becomes not just a practice, but a lifeline. And one of the simplest, most powerful ways to come back to now is something so small, it often gets overlooked. 3 conscious breaths. 3 breaths. That's it. When the mind is racing, when emotions start to overwhelm you, when stress hits like a wave, just pause. Breathe in. Feel the air come in through your nose. Let it fill your chest. Then breathe out, slowly. Do it again. And once more. That's 3. No more, no less. And in those few seconds, you've created a pocket of stillness, a moment where you chose presence over panic. It might not fix the problem, but it shifts your relationship to it. You move from reactivity to response, from chaos to clarity. This is what ancient teachers knew long before science confirmed it. that the breath is a bridge between body and mind, that by anchoring ourselves in the breath, we're not escaping life, we're entering it more fully. And the beauty of the three-breath anchor is that it doesn't require time or effort or silence. You can use it while waiting in traffic, before answering an email, in the middle of a difficult conversation. It's not about getting it right. It's about returning. Each time you take those 3 breaths, you're not just calming the nervous system. You're remembering something deeper, that you are here, that you are alive, that this moment is enough. Maybe peace isn't somewhere far away. Maybe it just begins with a breath. Be kind to yourself first, the gateway to compassion. We're often taught that kindness means giving to others. Be generous, be helpful, be understanding. And while that's beautiful, many of us learn to offer compassion outward before ever turning it inward. We become experts at supporting our friends through pain, forgiving our partners, comforting strangers, while quietly punishing ourselves. We speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to someone we love. You're such an idiot. Why can't you get it together? You're so behind. These aren't just passing thoughts. They become our inner soundtrack. And over time, we start to believe them. But here's the truth. Real compassion starts at home. It starts not with others, but with you. In Buddhist teaching, compassion isn't just a feeling. It's a practice, a way of seeing suffering and responding with care. And the first suffering we must learn to witness is our own. Not to dramatize it, not to wallow in it, but to acknowledge it. To stop pretending we're fine when we're falling apart inside. To stop holding ourselves to impossible standards while offering endless forgiveness to everyone else. Loving kindness meditation, a cornerstone in many Buddhist traditions, begins with the self. Not because we are more important than others, but because we can't pour from an empty cup. We start with a simple phrase: may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at peace. At first, it may feel strange or selfish, but slowly, something softens. The edges of your self-judgment begin to blur. You stop trying so hard to be perfect and start remembering how to be human. And here's what's beautiful. The more you practice self-compassion, the more naturally you extend it outward. Not from guilt, not from obligation, but from understanding. When you've sat with your own shame, you're less quick to shame others. When you've held space for your own fear, you recognize it in someone else's anger. You no longer need people to behave a certain way to feel okay, because your heart has grown roomier, steadier, more alive. Being kind to yourself isn't self-indulgence. It's spiritual clarity. It's saying, I am worthy of love, even as I heal, even as I make mistakes, even as I grow. And when you begin there, when compassion becomes an inner habit, you become a source of healing for the world around you. Not by trying to save everyone, but simply by showing up with a heart that understands what it means to be human. Love without chains. What detachment really means. To many people, detachment sounds cold. It brings up images of shutting down, turning away, not caring. In Western culture, where love is often measured by how much we sacrifice or how tightly we hold on, the idea of loving without attachment can feel almost cruel. How do you love someone and let go at the same time? How do you care deeply without clinging? But Buddhist detachment is something else entirely. It's not indifference. It's clarity. It's the ability to hold something precious, not with a clenched fist, but with open hands. Love, when mixed with fear, becomes control. We try to manage the people we care about. We want them to behave a certain way, to feel a certain way, to stay the same so we can feel safe. And when they change, as all people do, we suffer. Not because of their change, but because of our resistance to it. Detachment doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop demanding. You stop requiring someone to complete you, to heal you, to behave in a way that protects your expectations. You begin to see them as they are, not as a role in your script, but as a whole, changing, unpredictable human being. In that space, something incredible happens. Love becomes freer. You start to love people without trying to possess them. You listen more. You judge less. You let them grow, even if that growth takes them away from you. This is one of the hardest teachings in Buddhism, especially in the West, where so much of love is wrapped in ownership. We say, "You're mine," and it sounds romantic. But real love doesn't say, "You're mine." It says, "You are you, and I choose to love you as you are." Detachment also frees us from tying our happiness to someone else's choices. It allows us to remain rooted, even when relationships shift or end. It doesn't mean we don't feel pain, but we stop, making that pain the center of our identity. Imagine holding water in your hands. If you squeeze too hard, it slips away. But if you hold it gently, it stays. That's what Buddhist detachment is. It's not about letting go of love. It's about letting go of fear. And when fear leaves love, what remains is something rare: connection without control, presence without possession, care without condition. That kind of love doesn't imprison anyone. Not them, not you. Nothing lasts, and that's why it's beautiful. We try so hard to hold on to moments, to people, to phases of life we wish would never change. The way a child curls into our arms, the way sunlight filters through the kitchen window in a home we may one day leave, the sound of someone's laughter that, somehow, feels like home. And yet, no matter how tightly we hold, everything changes, everything. Impermanence is not a flaw in life. It is its essence. The seasons shift, bodies age, feelings rise and fall like waves, relationships evolve, and yes, people we love eventually pass away. It hurts, but that pain isn't proof that something's wrong. It's proof that something mattered. The Buddha taught that impermanence, anicca, is one of the three marks of existence. To resist it is to resist life itself. But to accept it, that's where freedom begins. Because when we stop fighting change, we start really living. You begin to cherish what you have, not because it will last forever, but because it won't. That morning cup of coffee, that phone call with your dad, that dog waiting by the door. You start to see them as they truly are, fleeting, precious, alive. There's a story about a monk who once held up a delicate glass and said, "I love this glass, not because it won't break, but because it will." He wasn't being morbid. He was being awake. He understood that the beauty of life is inseparable from its fragility. That what makes something sacred is that it doesn't last. In the West, we often chase permanence. We build, we plan, we save, we try to freeze things in place. But the more we cling, the more anxious we become, because deep down, we know nothing stays the same. And we're afraid of what that means. But what if impermanence isn't something to fear, but to embrace? What if it's the very thing that gives life its richness? Think about the last time you truly appreciated something. A sunset, a kiss, a goodbye. Would you have felt it so deeply if you believed it would last forever? We can learn to meet change with grace, not by pretending it doesn't hurt, but by honoring that hurt, by letting it remind us, this matters, this is real, this won't come again. And maybe, instead of running from that truth, we can bow to it, because nothing lasts. And that's exactly what makes it beautiful. Meditation is not escaping, it's waking up. There's a common misunderstanding that meditation is a way to escape, to block out the world, to retreat from discomfort. People imagine a monk on a mountaintop, eyes closed, tuning everything out. And in a culture that often praises hustle, noise, and constant motion, stillness can look like avoidance. But meditation is not checking out, it's checking in. It's not about running from reality, it's about meeting it more honestly. Not numbing yourself, but but noticing yourself. It's about sitting down, slowing down, and turning toward what's here with gentleness, with awareness, with breath. In meditation, we don't force the mind to be blank. We don't silence the chaos. We watch it. We become the witness instead of the actor. We stop getting pulled into every storyline the mind throws at us. The judgments, the memories, the loops of worry and hope. And in that watching, something shifts. We start to see the mind not as the master, but as a habit, one we can relate to with kindness instead of obedience. Meditation is the opposite of escape. It's the decision to stop running, to sit with discomfort instead of distracting from it, to sit with joy without clinging to it, to sit with pain without trying to fix it immediately. Just sit, just breathe, just be here. And being here is the most radical thing you can do in a world that constantly pulls you away from yourself. You don't need a cushion or incense or silence to meditate. You need attention. You need honesty. You need patience. Even one mindful breath can be meditation. Even one moment of awareness is a return. Meditation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you are when the noise fades. The part of you that's always been there. The part that watches without judgment. The part that knows how to be still. You're not escaping the world. You're waking up within it. Balance isn't boring. It's freedom. We live in a world addicted to extremes. All or nothing. Hustle or collapse. Feast or fast. We're taught that intensity is passion, that burnout is ambition, that chaos is just part of the deal. And in that constant swing between too much and too little, we quietly lose ourselves. Balance, in contrast, gets a bad reputation. It sounds dull, safe, passive, like settling for something in the middle instead of chasing greatness. But real balance, true balance, isn't boring. It's powerful. It's what gives you space to breathe, to choose, to live without being yanked around by every emotion, every opinion, every high and low. In Buddhist teaching, balance is called the middle way. The Buddha himself discovered it after living in both extremes, first as a prince with every luxury, then as an ascetic who nearly starved himself. Neither path brought peace. It was only when he found the space between indulgence and denial that awakening became possible. Balance isn't standing still. It's moving with awareness. It's knowing when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when to listen, when to hold on and when to let go. It's not about controlling life. It's about learning how to flow with it without drowning in it. And here's the quiet secret. Balance creates freedom. Because when you're grounded, you don't need everything around you to be perfect. You don't need people to agree with you or circumstances to align just right. You carry your center with you. Think of a tightrope walker. The point isn't to stay rigid. It's to adjust, breath by breath, step by step. That's what life is. That's what mindfulness is. A constant returning to center, again and again. It may not look dramatic. It won't always be exciting, but it will feel steady. And in that steadiness, you'll find a kind of joy that doesn't depend on adrenaline or applause. Balance doesn't mean life is always calm. It means you don't fall apart when it isn't. And that, in a world of extremes, is a quiet kind of rebellion. Your peace has always been here. A closing reflection. You've been searching in books, in relationships, in podcasts and quiet mornings, maybe in long walks, maybe in nights you couldn't sleep. Somewhere along the way, you sensed that life had more to offer than just running from one thing to the next. You felt there had to be something deeper, something steadier, something that didn't vanish the moment life got hard. And here you are. Through all the noise and distraction, through the fear and the pressure, something in you stayed curious, awake, willing to listen, willing to look inside. Buddhist wisdom doesn't give us answers as much as it gives us mirrors. It invites us to see clearly, not because clarity is comfortable, but because it's honest. We've explored where suffering begins, not in the world, but in the mind's resistance. We've seen how letting go, even gently, can be an act of profound courage. We've sat with our breath, our thoughts, our pain, and found that presence isn't about perfection, but about coming back. Again and again. Maybe you saw yourself in the stories. Maybe you remembered something you'd forgotten. Or maybe, for the first time, you heard your own mind differently, not as a judge or a critic, but as a pattern that can be softened, a place that can be held, a heart that can be healed. You don't have to be a monk to walk this path. You don't have to leave your life behind. You just have to show up to each moment, each breath, each step with attention and care, with less fear, with more space. That's how transformation happens. Not all at once, but gently, quietly, like leaves falling, like water settling. Your peace has never been out there. It's never been at the end of some perfect routine or hidden inside someone else's love. It's not a reward for getting everything right. It's here, now, in this breath, in this body, in this exact, imperfect moment. You didn't need to find it. You just needed to remember it. And if something in you softened while watching this, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, or return to this video whenever your heart forgets the way home. Your path is still unfolding, and we're honored to walk it with you.